Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. India-Israel relations, something we all speak about very often. Two countries which are located in the middle of their geopolitical game in their own sphere, in their own sides of the world, affected by terrorism, affected by extremist ideologies. We have noted cooperation between these two countries time and again, overtly as well as covertly. I'm here to analyze these relations themselves, the mistakes made, the opportunities ahead for mutual cooperation, and a good way forward. To discuss this, I have with me Nina Slama. She's an India-Israel relations expert, guest lecturer, teaching assistant at the IDC Interdisciplinary Center, Herzliya in Israel. Thank you so much, Nina, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, India and Israel relations is something every time there is some incident that takes place within both the countries, there is a huge outpouring of support that comes out. And that is just the people part of it. We also saw yesterday, we had our Independence Day, and a lot of Israelis wished us in terms of their post from you as well. And it is something that we've seen over time that the relations between the people have been really, really good. Uh, you know, in the past few years, there have been some historic events that have taken place, like the visit of the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister to Israel, and so on and so forth. How would you describe the relations between the two countries today? And of course, as I said, I'd like you to also comment on the people-to-people relations. What do the Israelis actually think about their relations with India?
Yes, so the relations between both countries are very good today. Both countries normalized their relations in 1992 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The relations became more strategic under Prime Minister Vajpayee, who wanted to form a triangle, a security triangle between Israel, the United States, and India in order to fight radicalism and terrorism around the world. It is true that when Prime Minister Modi came to power, the relations became stronger, more strategic, and even personal between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Both leaders knew each other from many years before becoming prime ministers, when Prime Minister Modi was the chief minister of Gujarat. And it is true that they extended the relations between both countries and the people-to-people relations as well. As you said, Prime Minister Modi was the first incumbent prime minister to come and visit Israel for the first time in July 2017. And Prime Minister Netanyahu repaid a visit to India in January 2018. We tend to focus on the defense and military relations between both countries, but it is true that both countries are collaborating in a wide range of sectors, such as agriculture, culture, water management, space, academic, and so forth. And this is where the people of both India and Israel are coming together and collaborating as well in the private and public sectors. And it is true that before the COVID-19 crisis erupted in the world, many tourists from Israel came to different places of India before and after their military service. And the connection between the people is and still is very close and very and very important for both people. And as you said yesterday, we were very happy to congratulate all of you for your Independence Day. And we could see it on social media and other platforms in the internet.
It's nice to have something like that. And yes, a lot of the Israelis do visit Goa and a lot of the beach destinations within India and the mountains in the north. So yeah, one has had the experience of actually interacting with many of them on the road as well. One saw a large display of empathy coming out from the people of India during the recent Israel-Hamas clash that took place, with the amount of rockets. And one of the things about war today is we can see it happening in our mobile phones, in the TV, because everybody is recording the incidents. There was a large outpouring of support from India. Um, was there a similar sentiment that you saw within Israel when India and China clash took place last year, where 20 of our soldiers died, and there was a lot of tension that actually came about in that region?
Yes, so it is true that Israel is well covered all over the world, including India. But it is not the same here in Israel. But it is true that when there are incidents in the border of Pakistan or China with with these countries or with other non-state actor, many people in Israel understand the threats and the struggle that India is going through when it engage in symmetric and asymmetric wars. And many people in the defense industry here in Israel knows exactly what India is going through, and is more than willing to help India in its wars and battles against different entities and countries.
That is interesting, because why I asked this question specifically is because Israel and China also have a very, very deep understanding in terms of trade. So it
Yes,
might put the government of Israel and the people who trade with them in a very difficult spot, because there's a friend and a friend. So what do you do?
yes.
It's a quite a dilemma. So how does one
It's,
react to something like that?
yes. So it is true that India is not the only actor who is concerned about Israel-China relations. The USA also was very vocal about these kind of relations. But I think that India is respecting the relations that Israel has with other actors, as India maintain relations with actors, different actors in the region, conducting a multi-aligned approach, I would say, with Iran, with the Palestinian Authority, with other actors that Israel is not in good terms with. And it is true that each and every country which has to deal with foreign policy has always this dilemma between ideology and interests.
National interest.
So, and national interests. And I'm sure that all countries are aware of, and especially India, who is also conducting a multi-aligned approach towards different countries.
Thank you for that answer. I think you put it very correctly. It is the national interest of a particular situation that must come into mind at that time, and one must have bilateral relations with many other countries, because one can help out in difficult situations. It is I think I agree with you. This is a very interesting way that you put it across. I'd like to ask you about the sentiment of the new administration that has come into Israel. There's been a change of a prime minister after almost 12 or 13 years, if I'm not wrong. How is the new administration looking at relations between the two countries?
So the new administration is very happy to have good relations with India and is willing to extend these relations with our delegation in India. There's also new people coming to India, new diplomats, Israeli diplomats coming there. And we see that this representative of Israel are continuing to have good relations with their counterparts in India. And it is true that the new government is willing to extend these relations. And we could see it when they came to power, and Prime Minister Modi congratulated Prime Minister Neftali Bennet on Twitter that they would like to maintain these good relations and extend them in various sectors.
I hope. I mean, things should look forward, and I think it'll be great to actually have an exchange of the heads of state once this whole COVID crisis is somewhat under control, because both the countries have suffered quite a bit through it. Of course, Israel has got very good vaccination ratios. India is trying its best by vaccinating almost 7 million people a day. It's going to take us some time, but I guess once that is over, it'll be nice to have both the leaders meet. I'm going to ask you a bit of a controversial question. You know, in its interests, as we mentioned in the last previous question, India has been advocating a two-state solution within the problems that Israel faces. How does Israel look at something like that?
So before trying to see different options for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we should look for a partner in the other side. We know that the Palestinian Authority is divided between the Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, Fatah. And it is very difficult for Israel to go to the negotiation table when the Hamas calls in its chart for the annihilation and the destruction of Israel. When the other party is calling or is not recognizing Israel, it's very difficult to come and solve this ongoing conflict. So first of all, we have to find a partner in the other side and then discuss about possible opportunities to solve this conflict. Because we saw a year ago that Israel is willing and is open to peace with the Abraham Accords, which were signed between Israel and different Arab and Muslim countries, such as Morocco, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan. So Israel is always willing to have peace with its neighbors and with Arab and Muslim countries and other who are willing to forge good relations with Israel. Because Israel see a lot of opportunities for all sides. So I think that when there will be brave and accurate, relevant leadership in the Palestinian side will be willing to sit in the negotiation table and first of all, recognize Israel, we will be able to talk about different options to solve this conflict.
Interesting. I think, Israel has come a long way from its conflicts from all its neighbors to having very good relations today with Egypt. I mean, who
Yes.
apparently, it's not been confirmed, but a lot of people do believe that it was Egypt who sat down between Israel and Hamas and got the whole situation under control last time when the 11-day spat that happened between both the parties. And today again, we see Israel and Lebanon border heating up. It this is a similarity between India and Israel is we are perpetually at some conflict to the other. Of course, the size of the countries are different, but the conflict factor is always there. How does a country like Israel deal with something like that?
So it is true that this is a big challenge, a huge challenge for Israel for many years now, from its establishment, right? Trying to deal with these security threats and national security threats. We're doing our best with a good military and defense people who are fighting day to day, these different terrorist organizations who are willing to annihilate Israel. This is what they say in their chart, and this is what we can say in their declarations. So Israel is doing everything it is best to counter these threats. And even today, there was a rocket that was launched from the Gaza Strip to Israel. So it is a constant threat coming from the borders of Israel, whether it is in the Gaza Strip or the border with Lebanon. And Israel is doing its best to counter these threats militarily.
Yeah, of course.
And in other levels, yes.
Yeah, there is a lot of effort that one can see going on in that region because it's something that heats up every 6 to 8 months. And with a new government in Iran, and this is a very latest development, how does Israel look at the entire situation?
In Iran is also, of course, a very is an eminent threat to Israel, with a radical ideology which called for the destruction also of Israel. And Israel is very concerned about Iran, and it doesn't matter who will be in the power as long as radical Islam and radicalism is leading the country. And it's not only Israel that is suffering from the Iranian leadership. We could see Iran fingerprints in different countries in the West Asia and in other places in the world. As long as the leadership there is conducting a radical Islam policy, it is very difficult for Israel and for other countries in the world to deal and to try to appease this threat.
Well put. I must say that's very well put. We've both the countries, as I mentioned in the opening statement, are in the center of their own geopolitical game. Israel has multiple enemies, adversaries, non-supporters around it. So does India, and with the situation around India developing as fast as it is today, it is a very, very dangerous situation. How do these two countries, and these are two unique countries in the world, you don't have, a pair of countries like this going through some situations like this. How do these two countries come together and ensure the security of the regions around them? Because there is the military factor, there is the diplomatic factor, and of course, trade. So, with these three things, how do you look at India and Israel actually pushing forward a very, very strong relationship to ensure peace and security?
I think that today all the countries, including Israel and India, understand that in order to counter all these threats, they have to come and forge good relations with other countries as well. Mm-hmm. We cannot deal with all the challenges this world is providing only on a bilateral level. And I'm sure that after signing the Abraham Accords, we will see more cooperation between India, Israel, and the Gulf countries, because all these countries have common opportunities and shared threats and the challenges that they can come together and solve together on all the levels that you mentioned, on the military, trade, and diplomatic levels. And I'm sure that these new connections between these countries will lead to not only to the strengthening of relations between India and Israel, but also to a more extended and large cooperations, not only on the bilateral level, but also on the regional level.
Multilateral level, exactly. I think that is what the aim should be, to actually grow up the relationship into multilateralism. And our yes. Current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he keeps talking about multilateral relations, yes. keeping national interests in mind. A last question, and this is just probably an easy one. With regards to Israel and India people, in India, people have a lot of respect for the Israelis because of a lot of help that was given by Israel during the 1971 war to India. Of course, in the 99 war, a lot of, again, cooperation happened in terms of, imaging and a whole lot of other things. And we've seen these relations always coming to play. I'm not sure, because India's, covert ops is absolutely quiet. Nobody talks about it until there's been a failure. But does Israel also look at bilateral relations with regards, ensuring security of their own selves between both the countries? Because there is a common enemy that we both face. It's, as you mentioned, religious ideology, extremism. That's the common threat that we both face.
Yes.
Is there some sort of a, work which is happening between both the governments to actually enhance this into the next level?
Yes, of course. The military and defense relations between both countries are very extended. We know about some of the cooperation which is published in the news, but there is a lot of things going on privately, of course, because of the sensitivity of the issues that both countries are dealt with. But as you mentioned, Israel always assisted India in its war when there were no relations between both countries before 1992. And I think that the defense and military sector will continue to extend, because the threats are just going to extend on a regional and international level. And the private and public sectors in Israel are very aware of and are looking for maintaining the good relations they already have with their counterparts in India, and also would like to explore other new area in this, of course, in this sector.
Relationship, yes.
Relationship.
I think you've answered the questions very, very well, and you've brought about some points which are, very interesting, because one, that the people to people connect has been strong, which is also probably, in my mind, forcing the governments to actually be a little more closer to the country, because there is a bit of a camaraderie which exists between both the countries, and there is a huge opportunity for it to grow, as you just mentioned. Apart from that, there are administration changes which take place around the world because of democratic governments. But one has seen over the years the two countries coming closer and closer, and creating, I won't say dependency, but an independent relation, even if, for example, India has relations with the Palestinians as well, and our Prime Minister has gone there and received a medal. In
Yes.
spite of having your own national interests, like you have your relations with China, we have issues with China. So there has been a very, very balanced, mature approach which has been kept between both the countries. And that is something that you brought out very, very well. I'd like to thank you for that. As well as thank you, Nina, for joining me for this wonderful discussion. I think this can be a good baseline to any further discussions that we'd like to do with you with regards India and Israel relations.
Thank you very much, Aadi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Okay.